Good afternoon, everybody. What's going on? This is Tiffany French coming through right here live in effect. Today topic will be dealing with African American history. All right. So I'll be going into the subject of about a Pan Africanist and an African American historian. All right. So there were so many of them during that time period. And we only know the main ones. We know people like Dr. John. We know Dr. Yosef Ben. We know Dr. John G. Jackson, um, Carter G. Woodson. But this brother right here, he has done work with people like W.E.B. Du Bois, all right? And he has studied a lot into Pan-Africanism, and he also been part of the Pan-African Conference. And he also has done historical information on African American history and the diaspora, and even in the continent. The person that I'm speaking of is Rayford Logan. All right, so who is Rayford Logan? Let me show you what he looks like. This is Rayford Logan, okay? So I'm going to go into his biography and his background, and then I have some information consist of his books that he done wrote and articles that he has written over the time period. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on his background. If you guys can see that screen right there. All right, so he was born today on January the 7th of 1897. And he died on November the 4th of 1982. He was a historian and Pan-African activist. He was best known for his study of post-Reconstruction America, a period he termed the nadir of American race relations. In the late 1940s, he was the chief advisor to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People on International Affairs. He was professor emeritus of history at Howard University. He was born in Washington. He was born and raised in Washington, D.C. He won a scholarship to William College, graduating in 1917. During the First World War, he joined the U.S. Army and served as a first lieutenant in the all-black 93rd Infantry Division, which undertook operations with French troops. Once the war ended, Logan remained in France, absorbing both the culture and the language. He helped to coordinate the Second Pan-African Congress in Paris in 1921. He returned to the U.S. in the early 1920s and began teaching at Virginia Union University, which is a historically black college in Richmond, Virginia. During the United States occupation of Haiti, he made a fact-finding missions to Haiti to investigate educational efforts and publish his findings in the Journal of Negro History in October 1930. The main findings indicated there was little improvement in education due to the choice of Southern white Marines as country administrators, men who have been raised with Jim Crow laws in the American South and had brought their prejudice with them to their new assignment in Haiti, a majority black republic. The main improvement effort resulted in establishing agricultural schools, which were highly expensive and staffed by non-French speakers, so classes had to be translated. The funding provided to these schools dwarfed the amount given to the majority of academic schools. Now, in the 1930s, Logan started graduate studies at Harvard University, earning an MA, which is Master of Art, in 1932 and a PhD in 1936. Logan became a professor at Howard University, where he practiced as a World War II. Hold on. Oh, my bad. I'm tripping. Wrong paragraph. Okay. Logan became a professor at Howard University, where he practiced as a historian from 1938 to 1965. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Logan to his black cabinet. Logan drafted Roosevelt's executive order prohibiting the exclusion of blacks from the military in World War II. In the 1951, Logan became director of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Logan was the 15th general president of Alpha Phi Alpha, the first intercollegiate Greek letter fraternity established for African Americans. Logan died of a heart ailment at Howard University Hospital at age 85. All right. So these are his legacy and honors. He was awarded the Spingarn Medal from the NAACP. His long-time residence in Brooklyn section of Washington, D.C. is a designated site of the city's African American Heritage Trail. All right, so these are the list of his bibliography: The Betrayal of the Negro, Dictionary of American Negro Biography, The Negro in the United States, The Negro in American Life and Thought, The Nader, The African Mandates in World Politics, The Senate and the Versailles Mandate System, the diplomatic relation of the United States with Haiti and the Dominican Republic. All right, so these are the externals links if you want to look up more information at the very bottom. All right, and further reading and the references at the bottom of the page. Okay, so let's get down to his work. So he had plenty of books that he had written. Let me go back. All right, so here's a PDF uploading. And this was written by him. The title is The Historical Aspect of Pan-Africanism, a Personal Chronicle. All right. So he wrote about his experience of Pan-Africanism, and he wrote about W.E.B. Du Bois and those who were part of the Congress, the Pan-African Congress, the conference they had the first time and the second time. So he wrote about his experience. All right, so start with the first paragraph. It says, the history of Pan-Africanism as a movement to encourage mutual assistance and understanding among the peoples of Africa and of African descent go back to the beginning of the 20th century. But it was only after World War I, the calamitous folly of the so-called superior races, that the movement as a whole began to have the ultimate aim of some form of self-government for African peoples. The credit for conceiving the idea of the Pan-African Conference that met in London in July of 1900 belonged to H. Sylvester Williams, a young West Indian lawyer. Among his aims were to bring peoples of African descent throughout the world into closer touch with one another and to establish friendlier relations between the Caucasian and African races. That he did not envision self-government or independence in Africa is evident from another of his stated objectives, namely to start a movement looking forward to the securing to all African races living in civilized countries their full rights and to promote their business interests. It was William Edward Barnhart Du Bois, as chairman of the Conference Committee on Address to the Nations of the World, who transformed Williams' limited conception of Pan-Africanism into a movement for self-government or independence for African people. He urged, let the British nation, the first modern champion of Negro freedom, hasten to give as soon as practicable the rights of responsible government to the Black colonies of Africa and the West Indies. Du Bois said nothing about the Spanish and Portuguese colonies and did not explicitly demand responsible government for the German and French colonies. He did propose, however, that the Congo Free State should become a great central Negro state of the world. He then advocated respect for the integrity and independence of the free Negro states of Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, etc. He also expressed a hope that the inhabitants of these states, the independent tribes of Africa, the Negroes of the West Indies and America, and the black subjects of all nations would take courage, strive ceaselessly, and fight bravely, that they may prove to the world their incontestable right to be counted among the great brotherhood of mankind. Thus, while Du Bois made a plea for the inclusion of Negroes in all parts of the world in the great brotherhood of mankind, he specifically urged self-government or independence for at least some Africans. Hence, in my judgment, this address to the nation of the world includes the first published exposition of Pan-Africanism in the modern sense. To be sure, the world paid little heed to it. Du Bois had written the 1900 conference, put the word Pan-African in the dictionaries for the first time, but the concept had no deep roots in Africa itself. The movement died for a generation, but Du Bois turned to the other tasks at home in the United States. All right, so this is what he wrote. As continue, Du Bois had formulated his concept of the worldwide aspect of race as early as 1892 while he was a student at the University of Berlin. Von Treschke, Surin, and Weber and Smoller made him see the race problem in America, the problem of the peoples of Africa and Asia, and the political development of Europe as one. In 1906, the eminent American anthropologist Franz Boas gave a new dimension to Du Bois' thinking by making him aware of the history of the Black kingdoms in Africa south of the Sahara. But at the Racist Congress held in London in July of 1911, Du Bois appears not to have developed either the theme of the worldwide aspect of race or that of the history of the Black African kingdoms. Moreover, reports in the London Times indicated that none of the speakers at the Congress discussed Pan-Africanism. Du Bois' own address was entitled "The Negro Race in the United States." However, the outbreak of World War I led to restatement of his Pan-Africanism. All right, and then it goes on saying, an article by Du Bois in the Atlantic Monthly for May 1915 entitled "The African Roots of War" emphasized particularly the economic aspect of imperialism with respect both to the war then raging and to possible future wars. In it, the author remarked that if a last peace were to be achieved, we must extend the democratic ideal to the yellow, brown, and Black peoples. Africans must have land and they must be trained in modern civilization. Lastly, the principle of home rule must extend to groups, nations, and races. The ruling of one people for another people's whim or gain must stop. The denomination of one's people by another without the other's consent, be the subject Black or white, must stop. Du Bois did not use the word Pan-African or Pan-Africanism, but he developed more clearly that he had since 1900 the concept of self-government or independence for Black Africans. Thus, World War I not only furthered the movement in general, it also revived Du Bois' personal quest for African freedom and gave him the opportunity to reach through one of the most influential magazines in the United States an audience that had probably not heard of Pan-African Conference and the Racist Congress. All right, so that's his article that he after World War I. So if you want to look more into it, you can. That's Rayford W. Logan. Boom, boom. Then he wrote another one called Education in Haiti, or Haiti, or Ati, if that's how they say it. I don't have a French accent. All right, so Rayford W. Logan, Education in Haiti, the Journal of Negro History that was published in October of 1930, volume 15, number 4. Okay, pages 401 to 460. Let's see what he's talking about. You know, I didn't find out later on that Haiti was considered as Latin America. I didn't even know that the Haitian people were considered as Latin people. Like I just thought they were Caribbeans all this time. I didn't find that out till later on. All right, so anyways, let's get down to business. All right. Colonial education. When one remembers that the great mass of Haitians were in slavery before 1791, one realized that education was the least of the worries of the colonial administrators. The conclusion, however, that no Negroes receive any education at all is not justified. L'École Noir of 1685 indeed was as silent as this question, although it contained the usual provision for religious um, catechism or catechism, as did the Virginia Slave Code. In Haiti, as in America, nevertheless, actual conditions rarely conformed to legal restriction. Usage is everywhere, the law, nothing. Evidence of what opportunities were offered the natives to lift themselves from complete ignorance must be sought then, not so much in the laws as the customs, the attitudes of the masters. The real situation, as revealed in the accounts of contemporary observers and other indirect sources. In general, the masters were probably more cruel than Spanish, English, and American slaves owners. The Marquis de Corrado is often cited as a justification for the savage retaliation of the insurgent Negroes. The French, according to the historian whose work is Anathema in Haiti, founded a system of servitude unsurpassed for severity, cruelty, nay, ferocity. These masters, while rich, fadiciously, and arrogant, made but little progress, and the lower classes were poor and illiterate. M. de Saint Remy declared that the whites were of a profound ignorance. Okay. And then here's the reference at the bottom. All right. So, anyways, there could scarcely be any public schools in Saint Domingo, or also known as Saint Dominique. The Heat wrote M. de Naloves and Montarcher in 1771 prevents shutting in the children. The instructors that might be brought over from France would succumb to the maladies, and there is no means in the colony of replacing them. Indeed, there is no one who devotes himself to the study of letters or science. Education in France makes girls unfit to live in Haiti. Damn. Needlework and reading are things completely discarded by them. There is no delicacy, no taste for letters and the arts. In all its history from its settlement until the destruction by the revolution, the French colony of Saint Dominico contribute but one book to French literature, and from its whites, it left not a single name of renown in art, literature, science, law, or arms. There is really nothing surprising about this situation when it is recalled that in the mother country itself, education did not concern the government until Condorcet introduced it and Napoleon perfected a system of state education. And then I'm going to continue. Finally, there is practically no evidence of the existence of schools. This is, of course, the negative authority of silence, but this case seems stronger than such evidence usually permits. Neither Edwards nor Ransford, contemporary travelers, said anything about a school. The remarkable map of Count Francois, or Cape Haiti, Haitian today, as it exists before the revolution, while showing the barracks, churches, prisons, hospitals, arsenals, and other public buildings does not reveal a single school. There is not even a Rue de l'École. Ransford mentioned, moreover, that besides public shops and long ranges of warehouses, the principal's building after the church were the government house, the barracks, arsenal, playhouse, and prison, two hospital, and an almshouse and a theater. All right, so that's part of this article that's dealing with Haiti and how Haiti became, how things have transitioned over time after after their revolution. So you guys know the independence of Haiti celebration was a few days ago. So I think, was it on January the 1st or the 2nd? One of them. That was the Haitian Revolution, Haitian Independence Day. So as we all know, Haiti as of today is still struggling financially. So they're still owing the French money after they done won their independence. Because basically what happened is, if you win independence like that, right, you're taking money from your coloners. So in order for the coloners to fully, in order for your country not to lose its independence again, you have to pay back the coloners. So what happened is, the country of Haiti is paying France back for all those years of the wars that have taken place for that country to gain its independence. So yes, Haiti is really struggling at this moment. And I don't even think their dollar value is worth as much, to be honest with you. Yep. So that's that information. Then here's another information right here. Which called the operation of mandate system in Africa. Let's go ahead and let's look at that. All right, let's continue. So there's this article, it's called Operation of the Mandate System in Africa. It says the operation of the mandate system in Africa. All right, so let's go ahead and get started right here. It says many students of Africa sees the mandate system, the surest safeguard for the rights of the native and the best methods of bringing some material and spiritual light into the dark continent. All right, so this article was written in 1928, October 1928. That's when it was published. Okay. Volume 13, number 4, and the Journal of the Negro History. But let me continue where I started off. So many students of Africa see in the mandate system the surest safeguard for the rights of the native and the best method of bringing some material and spiritual light into the dark continent. No discussion of the future of Africa can disregard the mandate system. Whether one advocates it or condemns it, he should have a knowledge of its detail. Moreover, practically all persons interested in the Negro as a whole are beginning to realize that the solution of his problem in any part of the world is dependent upon and affected by general world movements. General Jan Smuts, the famous Boer leader and former prime minister of the Union of South Africa, is frequently called the father of the mandate system. It is true that a pamphlet written by him in December of 1918 did greatly influence President Wilson in the framing of the second draft of the Covenant of the League. On the other hand, however, the three fundamental ideas of the system had been proclaimed long before this date. One of these, the idea of international control, is familiar to all students of history in the dual control of Egypt by England and France from 1879 and 1883, and the international control of the Tangier after the Algeciras Agreement of 1906. Another example, not so well known, deserves special attention because there is added the second fundamental principles, namely the open doors for perhaps the first time in modern history. And at any rate, these two ideals are sponsored in the same act, that of Berlin in 1885. After Leopold I of Belgium, by giving to the explorer Stanley the support which a Lartigot England had denied him, carved out an imperial domain in the Congo and thus aroused England's jealousy, the astute monarch felt the necessity for putting his newfound jewel under international protection. The diplomacy of Europe of the period found this scheme to its advantage, and the result was the famous Berlin Act of 1885, by which most of the European states, as well as the United States, guaranteed his possession of the territory subject to certain restriction. Among other things, the slave trade and slavery should be abolished in the Congo. Freedom of trade was to be permitted to all the signatories, and missionaries, explorers, and scientists were to be protected. During the latter part of 19th century, however, international control was given a severe blow by the mad scramble for land in Africa. Although France, Spain, Portugal, and England had held some posts along the littoral prior to this time, it was not until after 1875 that the real partition of Africa began. Not only the littoral, but also the hinterland figure in the plains of exploration and civilization. The white man's burden, La Mission Civiliantes, and Germany's international politics made necessary the conquest of Africa. Such a conquest, of course, should not be hindered by surveillance or interference on the part of other and rival nations. And so the Belgian atrocities were repeated in many different sections of Africa, although ignorance and distance helped to maintain a silence that in many cases will never be broken. All right, so this is another one of his articles. So basically, he was talking about how the colonies or the colonists, the Europeans, have affected the African system as far as implementing policies, implementing a system inside each countries, which basically maintain control of the people, the society, and etc. So as of today, Although a lot of these countries in Africa is no longer a part of the colonialism or under European control, but they still carry on European ideology themselves. They still carry on the languages because it has been instilled and ingrained into the society, into the culture. All right. So as we know today, there's countries in Africa that's dealing with a lot of interference from the Chinese government, where they're coming in, taking over resources, they're taking over the land, they're even trying to take over the schooling system, all of that stuff. So yes. Another person that goes into the concept about the European invasion in Africa is Walter Rodney. He wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which I think that is very important, that many people should read about. So I have that book myself, so I'm gonna read into that too. But again, if you guys want to check out this article, let me post it back up. All right, so if you guys want to check this article out, you can go on ASALA, which is Association for the Studies of African American Life and History, the University of Chicago Press Journals, The Operation of the Mandate System in Africa, which was written by Rayford Logan in 1928. All right. So you can check that out. Stealing resources. Yes. Yes, they were, brother. And peace to those in the chat. Thank you for coming through. All right. Now I have another information I want to show. I'm not going to be able to go through all of it, but I just want to show you guys. If you guys can see that screen. Yes, cool. All right. So here is the list of books that was written by Rayford Logan. This one's called Historical Judgment Reconsidered. Okay. Let's click on that. Okay, it's taking too long to load up. All right, anyways. So he has another book called W.E.B. Du Bois, which is the biography of W.E.B. Du Bois, written by Rayford Logan, and What the Negro Wants. Okay. Then he has another book called The Negro in the United States, The Betrayal of Negro from All right, I'm back. So I'm just going to finish where I left off. All right, so I'm not sure if you guys catch everything because the screen had locked me off. But anyways, another book he wrote was called The American Negro and the Old World Background and New World Experience, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. All right. For to Freedom, The Lives of Harriet Tubman, the Journal of Negro History, and the list goes on and on. Let's see what else we can find here. Yeah, the list goes on and on and on. So let's go ahead and let's look at the Negro in the United States. All right, so you can go on archive.org and you can borrow this book. Okay, it's going to let you borrow it for like an hour. It may let you borrow it for 14 days, which is 2 weeks. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull it up. Now, it says Chapter 2, Reconstruction. So what he wrote about the Reconstruction era. Presidential Reconstruction, revolutionary changes in a way of life generate fresh acts of violence, which complicated and prolonged the period of adjustment. Such a change was Reconstruction, the 12 years after the Civil War, when the federal government attempted to give the free men substantially equal rights with those enjoyed by other American citizens. Southerners strenuously opposed this attempt that the federal government after 1877 left the adjustment almost entirely to the southern states. In a larger sense, reconstruction of Southern society has continued until today, when new federal intervention have provoked again strenuous resistance, the nationalization of the so-called Negro problem by large-scale migration to the north from the south since 1914 has made Reconstruction a national problem. All right. And then it goes on to say the death of Lincoln on April 15, 1865, a few weeks before the end of the war, greatly augmented the difficulties of healing the nation's wounds. The fact that the great emancipator has been assassinated by a Southerner and that attempt had been made at the same time on the life of Secretary of State William H. Seward infuriated public opinion at the North. The fact that Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, on the whole followed Lincoln's plan for restoring the seceded states enraged many members of Congress. Unlike Lincoln, moreover, Johnson did not require that even 10% of the white voters would have to take the oath of allegiance before forming a state government. Above all, Johnson refused to call a special session of Congress during the summer and fall of 1865 and presented the 39th Congress, which convened on December 4th of 1865 with a vote accompli. All the seceded states except Texas had held constitutional convention. All others except Mississippi had annulled the acts of secession and ratified the 13th Amendment. They had elected members of state legislatures representative to Congress, and with the exception of Florida senators. All right, so that's what he wrote about the Reconstruction era. Let's see what else we could find from this book. Or, you know what, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go on to the next book. So the name of this book called The Negro in the United States. All right. And you can find it on here. Okay. All right. So let's look at the Dictionary of American Negro Biography. All right, so all right, so let's see. So this is the Dictionary of American Negro Biography. All right, so it goes into the list of African Americans. And what they have done as far as their work. So it's pretty much is like the encyclopedia of African Americans in the history, from during the time of slavery all the way up to the time that he wrote this book. So that's all it is. It's just giving account. So it's just basically an encyclopedia in a list of all the African Americans, or and all the events that happened. So this is very good. If you want to look at this information, you can. It's called the Dictionary of American Negro Biography. So some vintage sources are great to have. Let's see, the American Negro Old World and New World Experience. Let's look that up. Ancestors of American Negroes built civilization in Africa. Let's look into that. And that's chapter 1. All right. It says ancestors of American Negroes built civilization in Africa. Now, what this chapter is about. It was August 1619, more than a year before the landing of Mayflower. That month, a captured Dutch warship commanded by an Englishman anchored in the river of Jamestown in the colony of Virginia. Aboard the ship and counted as part of its cargo were 20 Negroes. The Virginia colony, founded only 12 years before, was sorely in need of workers, while the captain and his crew were sorely in need of supplies. The Negroes were soon sold to planters for fixed terms of labor. Fresh food and water were brought aboard, and then the ship quietly sailed away. This is how the first Africans arrived in English America. Now, here it is. This man, let me see what year this book was written. Because let's look at this. Let's see. What year was this book written? Okay, so this book was written in 1967, right? Okay, 1967. Just a thought. This man wrote this book in 1967. Listen. Thus began the history of Negro in what was to become the United States. The story of the first American Negroes and of the millions who came after them is so much a part of American history that it is impossible to know one without knowing the other. Negro history is a drama within a drama. That is a fact. Let's continue. And it says, we must know more than American history if we wish to understand the complete history of the Negro. We must go back in time to the centuries before the New World was even known to exist. For the 20 Negroes who first came to Jamestown, and for those who follow, history begins not in the New World, but in the Old World. Not in the Old World of England or Europe, but in the Old World of Africa. American Negro history is deeply rooted in the African past. Now, remind you, this man wrote this book in 1967. So for all those people who talking about the Aboriginal bullshit and how the Negroes came over here as Aboriginal people building this country, that's a bunch of bullshit. Here's this man that giving you an account on the African American history. This information should have been used to debunk the sources of Ivan Van Sertima and all the rest of them who was writing all these goddamn pseudo-ass information. He gave an accurate account of the history. That's what he did. Now let's go ahead and let's continue to read. But nah, y'all want to stick to that pseudo-ass shit. Now, I'm going to read this part one more time. American Negro history is deeply rooted in the African past. American Negro history is deeply rooted in the African past. All right, check this out. It says Negro helped to develop early African civilization. Africa is man's first home. Africa is man's first home. Africa is man's first home. Let's continue. Negroes helped to develop early African civilization. Almost all scientists today believe that Africa is the original homeland of all mankind, and not just of the American Negro. Anthropologists, scientists who study the development and behavior of mankind have unearthed evidence that man began his evolution more than 10 million years ago in Africa, south of the Sahara. Hold on, I'm not finished yet. The earliest tool maker and one of the earliest human types we know of lived in Africa about 2 million years ago. His fossil remains were discovered in 1958 by Louis Leakey, an English anthropologist at Olduvai, Georgia in northern Tanzania. Or is it Tanganyika, which is part of the new African state of Tanzania. All right. More recent discoveries trace man's descendant even further back in time, but they confirm his origin in Africa. Modern man or Homo sapiens. Hold on, modern man or Homo sapiens, as an anthropologist referred to him, appeared perhaps 100,000 years ago. His earliest remains have been found not only in Africa, but also in part of Europe and Asia. All human beings living today, regardless of race, are a member of this group. See, here's the man giving you the science. Now, this came from Rayford Logan, okay? And again, this book was written in the 60s. In the 60s. This man already knew about Homo sapiens. He even admitted himself, we are of the Homo sapien family. Now, the number may not be accurate as far as the years is concerned, but he was on point as far as the fossil that was found in Africa and the Homo sapiens. He was on point about that. I don't know why people never looked into his work, why people never took consideration and looked at his book. Because if you would have read this guy's information, it would debunk all that other bullshit that was taught in the community. I'm so serious. It would debunk all these bullshitty ass claims that you hear today in the conscious community, especially. If you read people like him, you will be surprised, you will be shocked. And I think a lot of us will have a thorough knowledge and really know our history. And we wouldn't be questioning our history. We wouldn't be going through all these identity crises and all these different schools of thoughts that's giving all these make-believe stuff. All right, let's continue. It says, there are many varieties of modern men. Scientists are not certain how the various races of modern men develop, though scientists know that very many varieties of groups of men exist. They usually describe men as belonging to three great racial stocks. They do this mainly for study purposes. These stocks are the Mongoloid, yellow-skinned people, the Caucasoid, or white-skinned people, and the Negroid, black-skinned peoples. Each of these great racial stocks reflected a wide range of physical traits. These are, in addition, several groups of men belonging to combination of these three stocks. Four groups of men belonging to two of the great racial stocks lived in early Africa. One of these groups was a Caucasoid people who probably came to North Africa from Asia. Since they lived on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, they are often described as belonging to the Mediterranean race. The other three groups in early Africa were the Bushmen, the Pygmies, and the Negroids. For the most part, these brown-skinned groups lived south of the Sahara. Scientists think they developed in Africa itself. Again, this book was written in the 60s. Okay? This book was written in the 60s. The exact origins of the Negroes are surrounded by mystery. Since Negroes are by far the largest groups in the sub-Saharan Africa today, they are thought to be the most successful of the groups living there in prehistoric times. In their earliest days, the Negro were probably a West African forest people who hunted for their food. Later, they lived along the banks of rivers and lakes and became fishermen. As fishermen, their way of life was closest to that of settled people. When knowledge of planting and herding spread to sub-Saharan Africa, the Negroes had much less difficulty than the Bushmen and the Pygmies in learning to farm and in changing to a fully settled way of life. Now here's this man. This is a man right here that's given us science. He's given us science. But let y'all tell it. Egyptian Negroes helped build a cradle of civilization about 6,000 years ago along the banks of the Nile in northeast Africa. Modern man began to build one of his earliest civilizations, attracted by rich natural resources. People of varying racial backgrounds settled along the Nile. Negroes helped to build that civilization, which today is known as Egypt. Village founded by Negroes became important towns and cities within the Egyptian Empire. Negroes farmed the land, helping to produce the surplus food that made city life possible. All right. And then he has some questions at the very end. Okay. But hold on. Hold on right here. Wait a minute. Ethiopians bring Egyptian civilization to Africa south of the Sahara. During the 18th century BC, Ethiopians gained control over Egypt. Before this time, the Egyptians had expanded into Ethiopia, making that land and its people a part of their empire. Gradually, Ethiopians grew in power within the Egyptian government. Then about 741 BC, the Ethiopians began a military campaign to complete control over Egypt. Their success brought Paniki, Piaki, an Ethiopian prince to the Egyptian throne. He was succeeded by three other Ethiopian pharaohs. For almost a century, Egypt was part of the Ethiopian Empire. Ethiopians ruled in Egypt until the land was invaded by the Assyrians in 671 BC. And then skip on down. During these years, Ethiopian Negroes began to migrate to other areas of Africa. Their ancestors had been the original inhabitants of Ethiopia, but the land was now under foreign rule, and they no longer could think of it as their own. They moved southward, westward, bringing with them the customs and tradition of two closely related ancient civilizations, Egypt and Ethiopia. These carriers of civilization were to influence many other groups in the heartland of Africa. Again, that was written by Rayford Logan, and this was in the 60s. Okay? Now, Negroes built great states south of the Sahara. South of the Sahara, stretching across Africa from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, is a wide belt of savanna grass and woodland. This region is called the Sudan. Almost at its center is Lake Chad. The portion of the Sudan from Cape Verde or Cape Verde on the Atlantic coast to Lake Chad is known as the Western Sudan, or simply West Africa. Simply West Africa. But let's continue. The remaining portion is called the Neolithic Sudan, since it crossed by the Nile River and by other rivers that flow into the Nile. The Sudan played a major role in the early history of sub-Saharan Africa. It was in this vast region that farming was first practiced. The Negroes of the Sudan were the first people south of the Sahara to make and use iron tools. They were among the first in sub-Saharan Africa to organize kingdoms. Some of these kingdoms became large empires, powerful enough to gain control over neighboring states and to unite peoples of different cultures under an efficient central government. Now, they say the word Sudan is from an Arabic expression meaning land of the blacks. Okay? So, here is the map of West Africa right here. All right. And it talks about the early African kingdoms at the bottom. The people of West Africa changed their way of life. Uh-oh. Should I go ahead and read this while I got a little time under my belt? Yes, I should. The greatest empires south of the Sahara were located in West Africa. They developed here for several reasons. Some 3,000 years before Christian era, the Negroes of this savanna region began to plant millet and rice, two cereal crops that provided food for a growing population. Then around 500 BC, descendants of these grand farmers learned to make iron tools and weapons. Grain growing and iron making. Two revolutionary developments led to still a third development. New regulations were needed in a society which was undergoing rapid change. The simple systems of government that had been adequate in earlier times became more complex as larger kingdoms and development. In some ways, these West African kingdoms resembled those of ancient Egypt and Ethiopia. This was partly due to the migration of the people from the Neolithic Sudan and the Nile Valley, who brought to Western Sudan some of the customs and tradition of Africa's earliest states. But the West African kingdoms differed in many ways from Egypt and Ethiopia. They retained many of the practices that West African peoples themselves had developed over the centuries. Those kingdoms in which farming and iron making were first practiced eventually became powerful enough to control their weaker neighbors. The result was the formation of empires, each including a number of small kingdoms ruled by a strong central government. Among these empires were Ghana, Kenem, Bornu, Mali, Songhai, and the Maze and Hausa states. All right, three powerful empires in West Africa: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai were the most powerful of these West African empires. They are also the best known to historians because their people and persons who visit them left many records. All right. So I'm going to stop right there. Okay. Because there's a lot of information to read upon, but it comes from this book, which I strongly recommend, The American Negro Old World Background and New World Experience. Please make sure you read this book. Check this book out, okay? If you get a chance to, you can go on archive.org, look up Rayford Logan. Rayford Logan. That's who the author is. All right? There we go. Anyways, I want to thank you all for watching, for those of you that's tuning in. And if you want to share my channel, you are more than welcome to do so. All right, make sure you hit the notification bell. Make sure you subscribe to the channel when I come on. Make sure you do all those great things. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, please be safe and take it easy on yourself. And until next time, I'll reconnect with you guys later. All right. Peace and power and elevation be to all of you. Thank you so much. And until then, be safe. All right. That's it. All right, then. Y'all have a good one.